Hi, this is Nick from PrimeLoops.com. Today I want to show you how to use a limiter. On a basic level, a limiter is a way to maximize the impact of your sounds, as well as make good use of the headroom in your mix. The way it does this is by eliminating some of the peaks in your audio material, and then bringing the remaining material up in volume. Let me show you what I mean by this. Now this is the drum loop that we recorded back in the Concise Guide to Compression video. Here it is with no processing. As you can see, it's bumping up right against 0 decibels here, and if it goes over, it's going to clip. So the question then becomes, how do we make the drums that we have in this clip punchier and deeper, while still retaining a volume level that's below 0 decibels and thus not clipping? Well, what you should focus on is the fact that there are some peaks in the waveform, the most obvious of which is right here. And it doesn't seem like it's doing a whole lot for our sound, but because this peak is so loud right here, I can't turn up the volume of this drum loop without clipping the output. So I need a way to reduce this peak specifically in volume, while leaving all my other drums alone for the most part. This process will free up more headroom in the mix between the loudest drum and the highest level that we can turn it up to until we clip. Now of course the next question you might have is, what effect does it have on the sound when you start chopping off these little peaks and then bringing the volume of the resulting audio up more? Well, that's something you just have to use your ears for. If you apply a limiter and it starts to negatively affect the dynamics of your track, that is, the variations between loud and soft, in a way that you don't like, then you're applying too much limiting. So the next question is, how does the limiter actually go about its task of cutting off the peaks at the top of the waveform so that we can get more level out of it? Let's take a look at a simple but very effective limiter plugin right here. This is Young's W1 limiter. It's actually a clone of the Waves L1 limiter, but it's free to download. And as you can see here, it has 3 controls. And of course remember that all the techniques and knowledge that I give you here can be applied to any limiter that you choose. So let's check out these 3 controls and see what we can do in terms of getting more punch in the drum track here. The most important parameter here is threshold. Threshold determines where the limiter will start to kick in. If you saw the compressor video, you'll know that there's also a threshold parameter there, and it works in exactly the same way. When audio reaches or exceeds the threshold level that you have set, the limiter will kick in. However, unlike a compressor, which reduces the volume of the material that gets compressed according to a ratio, the limiter basically eliminates everything above the threshold. Now after all the peaks that are above the threshold level get cut off, the limiter will then automatically turn up the material to make up for the available headroom that's been freed up since you chopped off those peaks. The ceiling control tells the limiter the maximum level that it can bring your audio up to. For instance, if I have the ceiling set at negative 6.96 decibels, and I have the threshold set down at negative 15 decibels, everything above negative 15 decibels will be cut off, and then the limiter will increase the volume of the material to a maximum of negative 6.96 decibels. The release time is the least important here, and actually for most material you can just leave it at its default of 100 milliseconds. This control works the same as it does on a compressor. In other words, when the plug-in kicks in at the threshold level, it will take a certain amount of time to fade out from full limiting to no limiting at all. And this fade out period is the release time. So here it will take 100 milliseconds to go from full limiting back to the original audio. So now that you have a taste of what the limiter does and what the controls do, let's see if it can add some volume and punch to this drum loop. The only parameter I'm really going to concern myself with here is the threshold. As you can see over here, I have expanded the volume meter so that I can see where most of the material in the drum loop sits. And of course it will peak at around 0 decibels, but knowing the maximum level of the majority of my drums in the loop will be helpful, because that's about where I'll set the threshold at. So therefore the limiter will only be chopping off the occasional peak here and there that's not actually doing much for my sound. I'll go ahead and turn the limiter on here. Now I'm actually going to bring my ceiling control down just a little bit to say negative 0.65 decibels. The reason I'm going to do this is that as I bring the threshold down, the limiter is going to be turning my signal up and then fading out over the release time. The issue here is that once in a while the release time won't react in a way that will actually catch a clipping signal. For that reason, I'll just turn the ceiling down a little bit to catch any clipping that might occur. So first I'm going to play the drum loop back, and I'm going to keep this at 0 decibels so no limiting will be occurring. And I'm just going to pay attention to what's happening on the meter here and figure out where most of my drums are sitting. And indeed they're sitting right around here, just above -6 decibels. So at least I know roughly where my threshold should be sitting to get an optimized sound. And as I play the drum loop back, I'm going to bring the threshold control down more and more until I get to the point where the threshold is set just above where most of my drums are sitting in the mix, and only chopping off those big peaks here and there. So as you heard, when I turned the threshold value down, the drums started sounding much punchier and thicker. And the reason for that is that if we go back to this original drum clip here, these little peaks here and there that aren't adding much to the sound are getting chopped off, and then the drums are getting turned way up in volume. I want to prove that point to you by recording the limited signal into another audio clip, and then we can compare the two waveforms to one another. I'll go ahead and stop these and disengage the limiter for now. Let's compare these two waveforms. Now here's the original with its little peaks, and here's the new recorded waveform. And as you can see, the drums are turned up a lot more in volume because I had a lot of extra headroom to work with once the peaks right around here got chopped off. Let's go back to the original waveform, and again you can see that compared to this gigantic peak right here, this first kick drum looks really small. But then if you look at the beginning of the clip after the limiter was applied to it, you can see that the drums were balanced out a lot more with one another, and as a result became a lot louder and punchier. So again, I'll go back to the original waveform. I've got the limiter turned off now. I'll bring this other audio clip right below so that we can just go between them and listen to the differences. Here's the original drum loop. Here's the new drum loop. Original, new. So again, if I bring up the interface for the limiter, you can see that it's very simple. All you need to do is find where most of the sounds are sitting in your mix, and from there you'll be able to identify the ones that are way too loud, and those will be the peaks that you'll want to try to eliminate while still retaining a good sound. Once you know where your drums should be sitting level-wise without the peaks, you can set your threshold accordingly. If, while you're setting your threshold, your signal starts to clip, that is go over 0 decibels full scale here, just bring your ceiling control down a little bit. Oftentimes it doesn't need to be any more than a decibel, and that'll tame any of the errant clipping that might be coming out of your limiter. I'll see you next time for more music production tips and tricks. Stay creative.